what was happening too on us sometimes, I would be, oh, okay, stop, and I can't take hearing anymore, and but he'd keep talking, so I kind of heard the whole story before, but my story didn't start with Chris, and it didn't end with Chris, which I'm so grateful for, even though I love him more than I love my life myself. And I learned that if someone could be saved by a mother's love and prayers, they'd be saved. But guess what? That's not how it works. And all the time. I mean, eventually, I was, my prayers were answered. But really, it wasn't until I started getting better that I saw how that would work. Am I still not close enough?
Yeah. Okay. Towards your face. There we go.
Okay.
And hold it, move it where it's close to your mouth. There you go.
Okay. Everybody here? Okay.
Yeah.
I have to talk with my hands, so this is going to be hard to hold my head still and still talk with my hands, but we'll see what happens. But anyway, my story did not start or begin with him. I was born into a wonderful family. Actually, I was born here in Lubbock a long time ago. My parents were both students at Tech. And little did I know that they were both affected by the family disease of alcoholism. And but it took me a long time to figure that out. They were not alcoholics. They did not drink. They have never drank a drop in their life, which kind of tells you, black or white, up or down, all or nothing. So they had never had alcohol to this day that I know of in their life. But I grew up as a very fearful child. This part did amaze me, that when Chris was talking about being fearful, the anxiety, the not feeling good enough, I always felt like I had a secret that I was having to keep anyone from finding out that I really was a fraud. I don't know what kind of fraud, but even as a little girl, I worried about people seeing the real me. And it seemed like the only person that saw the real me was my mom. And that is still a relationship today that I have to work on a lot, because I felt that she did not approve of me, that I wasn't good enough, that I never did it well enough. And that's not true. It's the disease of alcoholism in her. It's an Al-Anon that's gone untreated for all these years. When I was a little girl, I kept hearing stories about my grandfather and my great-grandfather and my uncle on my dad's side of the family that were killed in separate train accidents. And I had this horrible fear that trains were out to get us, that there was something wrong with our family, that just were like magnets to trains that would kill us. And I know that sounds crazy, and that's kind of what the family disease is. It's pretty crazy. And I would have dreams of trains jumping the track and chasing me across the fields and running and all this stuff. And as I got older and my dad started talking to me, I realized we did have a family disease, but it was not trains, it was alcoholism, because all three of those men were killed because of their drinking and trains in the way. And so that kind of tells you the history. And my dad is the only sober man in his family, except for one other uncle. He's the only, except for his grandchildren, he's the only man living in his family, and they've all died, probably from complications of alcoholism. And my mom's side of the family, they were all goody two-shoes. I didn't think they had anything wrong. I thought my mom had grown up perfect, and, I would be going through some kind of angst. And again, because I felt so unworthy, I felt like no one liked me. If they found out who I was, they wouldn't want to be my friend. The people-pleasing, I didn't even know who I was. I learned to read people very quickly. What do I need to be to make them like me? And well, that took us a lot of work. It's pretty exhausting at times. But anyway, my mom, I thought she was perfect, that she had no problems in high school. She had this perfect family. She didn't understand me. She could not feel what I was feeling, because I felt very isolated, ugly, just very alone. And she told me one day that her grandfather had died. This was when I was a teenager. Her grandfather had died of cirrhosis of the liver. And of course, my eyes got big, and she said, but not the kind from alcohol. I was like, oh, okay. And I said, is there a kind? And, oh, yeah, okay. And I remember even asking people that question through the years and then kind of looking at me like, if you need it to be, it was kind of like, and only in the last 6 months, I finally got the courage, because that was kind of it. You just did not talk about it. And again, those family secrets. We Al-Anonics, we can keep those secrets going. We can hide that stuff. We can rise to the occasion so that no one knows what's really going on in the family. And it just causes a lot of sickness. It really does. And I finally got the nerve, and I said, Mom, he died in the late 20s. How did the medical community know at that time that he died from cirrhosis of the liver that was not caused by alcohol? And she looked at me like I had grown 2 heads and said, because my grandmother said so. Like, duh. Oh, okay. So I thought 2 perfect Al-Anons came together, had family, and that's, someone had given me the book, Adult Children of Alcoholics, one time in high school. I fit every profile. I was the checklist. They could have put my picture on the front of that book, and it would have been, I would have been the poster child for that. But I thought, my parents aren't alcoholics, so I just, dismissed it, not realizing how deeply the disease was affecting me already. I was, tried to be a goody two-shoes, tried not to get in too much trouble, but, left relationships I should have stayed in, got into relationships I shouldn't have got into, kind of a whole pattern there. And married a guy, Chris, my other kid's dad, and probably who had also been affected by drinking in his family. And, it's just nearly like 2 trains colliding, looking for something that's missing in our own lives, and we look for it in the other person, and they can't provide it because they're looking for the same thing. And after about 12 or 13 years and 3 kids, that marriage failed. And I could blame it on him. I made sure that I painted the picture to make it look really good, that was not me, that, out of pity I probably married him and, whatever. Because I didn't want that to be my fault. I could not see that it was my fault, and it was. I can see that now. But less than a year later, I met this, or a couple months later, we got married less than a year later. I married this guy named Mike, and this poor guy had all these kids at home that he and his wife had adopted, and she left him with all those kids, and he was so angry and resentful, and he just needed help with those kids. And guess what? I could be the savior of everyone in that whole family. And I could love him. I could love those kids. My kid, they just all 7 kids blending together and making this one big happy family. And he told me right before we got married, he said, when I was he was about 40. He said, when I was in my 20s, I think I had a drinking problem. I was like, why? What? Well, I just drank too much, and I drink till I pass out. And he said, and I said, well, how long has it been since you've drank? And he said, 20 years. And he had no program at that time, during that time. And he said, 20 years. And I was like, oh, you're not an alcoholic. If you haven't drank for 20 years, you're fine. In fact, come to find out, he had already started drinking again after his divorce, but it was very hidden. But he kind of, of course, it progressed like it does. And the drinking became more pronounced. It became horrible. The constant walking on eggshells, the just praying for him to hurry and pass out so I could get the 7 kids to bed, and just being emotionally unavailable to my kids or anyone else, just going through trying to survive. And he pretty much let me think it was my fault. His kids felt like it was my fault that he started drinking again, and I took that blame. And I cannot tell you how hard I tried to be good enough and smart enough and pretty enough and earn enough money and do all these things and to keep spinning those plates and make that house perfect so that he would be okay. If I could just do that, he wouldn't have to drink. And the threat of physical violence and then a couple of incidences of physical violence, it just had made it nearly unlivable. And in my head, I was staying for the kids because I was afraid what would happen to his kids. But through a lot of searching, I realized I was staying because if I left, everyone would know that I had a broken picker and that something was wrong with me. I had just left 2 husbands, and and I wasn't even 40 yet, And this will give you an idea of how crazy I was. My kids are all lactose intolerant. They could only have one brand of milk in the little town that we lived in. There was 1 or 2 little grocery stores, and they only carried one brand of that milk, the lactose-free milk. I went to the grocery store, and just living in the constant craziness and the never knowing what to say, what not to say. Everything you said that was right one day would be wrong the next. All constantly trying to protect the kids from the anger and the fits and what all. Anyway, I went to the store to buy them milk, and I sat there and looked at the milk and started crying because I couldn't remember what kind I was supposed to get. And there's only one kind I can get. So I convinced myself I had a brain tumor. Made an appointment, went to our family doctor, and told him I have a brain tumor. And he politely sent me to another kind of doctor. Yeah. And finally, when then I became fearful of my life, and I had threats made against my life, I realized I was going to have to be the adult and leave that marriage. And that was so hard because all I wanted to ever be was a good mom and a good wife. And I couldn't be. I was such a failure. And but I finally left, and I thought, well, that's that. I don't have. It's all going to be fine. And I think we got a divorce when Chris was 14, 15, about the time he started, with his stuff. And but I didn't know it. And when things started going, I was often irritable. I was not really emotionally available for my kids, and I couldn't figure out why. I couldn't figure out, after having gotten out of that marriage, why things did not get so much better quicker, And not realizing how sick I was in my own, that spiritual malady was all over me. One thing I did fail to mention, when I was a little girl and I didn't feel like anyone loved me or through these marriages, I always felt that God loved me because I had a real strong faith system. And that is what got me through so many of those times when I felt like I was the only one that, I felt like I was the only one that was like who I was, which I can't even describe that, but just feeling so isolated and so ugly. I always felt that God loved me. And that's important to the story in just a little bit. But anyway, when Chris started getting these positive tests on drug tests and things because of his athletics and things like that, I remember thinking, oh my goodness, I know kids experiment, but I thought he was smarter than this. He poor naive kid, he just can't hide it. He's just too naive to do this because he's getting caught, not realizing that he was already 2 years into his disease. And then, he went off to college, and again, when I look back and I think, okay, if I could just get him graduated from high school and get him to North Texas and move his stuff in that dorm, then leave him that car, done. It'll be okay. By some miracle, he's going to figure it out and be okay. Well, I have to tell you, the first call I got from him when he was had been arrested in a jail was pretty devastating. I think I threw up. I don't know. No one in my life had ever even been close to a jail that I knew of. I could not imagine that he had been there overnight. And so, of course, I quickly called a bail bondsman, gave him my credit card. They probably still have that number. And, got him out the minute that I could. And kept throwing money at him, trying to, come on, just get it together, get your stuff together. You're a smart guy, and it not working. And the second time he got arrested, he was so proud of himself. I remember him saying, I'm so proud of myself, Mom. I didn't call you to tell you I'd been there. I just called the bail bondsman, used your number, and bailed myself out. And I was like, good. You're being self-sufficient. And, I've got $500 on my credit card again, or however much it was. I don't even remember. But just as the disease was progressing in him, it started progressing in me. Remember I said I had 3 kids? Had a boy and a girl at home. I don't even remember hardly them during this time of my life. And I hate that. I hate that. And I've made amends to them, and they have forgiven me by God's grace. But I hate that I was so consumed, so obsessed with him. As obsessed as he talks about his addiction or his alcoholism was, that is how obsessed I was with him. He was whose life I woke up into every morning. I didn't wake up into my life. My first thought was, is he alive this morning? Is he in a ditch crying for me? I can't tell you how many nights that I laid there, wondering if he was crying for me. And telling myself that the pain in my chest, which felt like an elephant, was anxiety and not a heart attack. And thank goodness I was right. But, just the being totally consumed in someone else's life and not taking a bit of care of my own life, not doing what I needed to do for myself to be okay. And, I thought the first time he went to treatment, I'll never forget, the guy calls me to come to Family Week, and I was like, I can't come there for a week. If I don't keep these plates spinning and keep the job going, there's no insurance for him to keep, to go to these places. But he talked me into it, and then as an afterthought, as I was about to hang up, he said, "Oh, by the way, have you heard of Al-Anon?" And I was like, "Yeah." In my head, Al-Anon was, this is so horrible, but it was kind of the loser family members that just couldn't leave that horrible person, and just kind of stayed around and were whiny. I was like, no, I'm not going to go to Al-Anon. And I had, when my husband Mike, before we divorced, he had gone to rehab a couple of times, and I was in a couple of meetings, and again, I did not see the attraction at that point, but again, I was pretty involved in my own self. But anyway, he said, well, if you could get to 1 or 2 Al-Anon meetings before you come to Family Week, that would be great. And I was like, seriously? You realize this is his problem, not mine, right? And he was so sweet. He said, I know. He agreed with me, but he said, but if you can go 1 or 2 times, that'd be great. Actually, if you could go 3 or 4 times, really, if you could make 5 or 6 meetings before you, and I'm like, my mind is blown away because I'm thinking 5 or 6 meetings. Does he not know I'm a single parent? I'm like, da. But I thought, because I'm a people pleaser, fine. Well, in my little county, Bosque County, there's not any Al-Anon meetings. But I really didn't understand the difference between AA and Al-Anon, and I can't tell you how many little meetings at different little buildings around Bosque County that I would hear about at a meeting, that I would drive up and walk in, and they're just screaming like a girl, and I'm screaming like a girl, and I run away because they don't know why I'm there or who I am. And I'll never forget, in McGregor town close by, I was late, and me and this guy skidded up at the same time to this church. I'm in a white minivan. I look like a soccer mom. I'm getting out, but I've got to do this. I told the guy I'd do those meetings. And I get out, and I run to the door. He is in a Z28, probably 20, 30 years old, smoking, shaking. I mean, he looked so rough, bless his heart. And he got out, and we just nearly bumped into each other trying to get to the door, and it was locked. And I looked at him. I said, what are you here for? And he said, I'm here for AA. And I said, well, I'm here for Al-Anon. And then we just kind of looked at each other like, we don't know who you are. And we got in our cars and left because there was no meeting at that spot. And I pray for him because I can remember seeing the desperation in his eyes, and I didn't understand it at the time. And it makes me sad that those doors weren't open to him. And I'm so grateful when I do see such active recovery, because like I said, it looked like he had just got off work, and if I can get to this place, I might be okay. But I finally found some meetings in Waco, And I found out for the first time that I was not the only person in the whole world that was having this trouble. Because in my eyes, every other family was perfect. Every other kid was okay. I was the only one that had a son that was self-destructing. And I was the only one that felt the way I felt. And so that was a great thing. And I still wasn't, again, I was going out of, I was obliged to do that before I could go to Family Week. But just that little bit of hope, because I was going to need it, because we hadn't even started on our ride, honestly. And had a great Family Week, learned so much about the family disease of alcoholism. And I hear Chris's story and others' story. I think I felt like that as a kid. I wasn't comfortable in my skin. I had the fear, the anxiety. My body just doesn't react to alcohol the way theirs does. And, it just finding that there were other people out there was so helpful. And I have a lot to tell you, and it's so weird. I kind of practiced. I have about an hour commute one way, and I kind of practiced what I wanted to say because I hadn't done it, this long, an hour. Oh my goodness! And my memory is fuzzy, and I didn't take any drugs or drink during that time. And I'm driving and I'm talking and I'm remembering. And I realize I've got some work to do because the anxiety is still there about a lot of that stuff. Things that I had forgotten about, that I don't want to forget about if it ever helps another family member discover Al-Anon. And one thing that as this kept going, to me, it was kind of like the nail in the coffin that I really was that bad person, that fraud that I thought I was when I was growing up. It really had to be me, first 2 marriages and now my son. And I didn't know how to go on, and I had a lot of guilt, and guilt and control is what we're about. You can guilt us into something, we'll control the whole situation and just fix it, And one of the speaking of guilt, in my marriage, my second husband, Mike, I didn't want to leave, but I could not, again, the guilt and then the control. I would pray and I would say, God, how can someone drink this much and not die? Please. What's wrong? Why does he keep living? And I used to be really ashamed to say that I'm thinking, I don't remember, but I'm pretty sure I probably snuck in a couple of prayers in there. Please just let him go ahead and finish dying because he's killing us. And I used not to share that because then I was so ashamed. But I have met so many people that got to that point where they just needed relief. It's not that they wished someone dead. It's that they could not stand their life anymore. So I went to the rehab, the Family Week, loved it, hooked from that moment on. Went home, knew that I could be my own little Al-Anon meeting. I didn't have to go all the way back into Waco. And I got every book they made, or just about at the time, every book that they published. I had my little chair, I had my little readings. I was working through those steps all by myself. And again, y'all know what happened there. And as Chris continued to deteriorate, so did I. And but the last facility that he was in, there was a social worker that was there, and she had convinced Chris that it was dangerous for me to be on his call list. She took a great disliking to me for some reason. I mean, that was her position. She was a social worker. I'm not making a statement about anything. I work in that area myself, so there's nothing there. But that's who she was, and she got to control what happened to him. And and she told me, she confirmed my greatest fear, that I did this. I made him that sick. That it's always the mom that does that to him. She told me that. And I remember at that time, I wanted to die. Actually, I didn't care who died. I don't care if I died. I didn't care if Chris died. Somebody had to die because I could not take the emotional pain any longer. And I hated myself for being such a chicken that I couldn't take care of it, that I'd be willing to sacrifice my own son just so I could get relief. And I have never hated a woman as much as I hated this woman in my life. And I plotted to kill her all the time. I just would imagine breaking down the doors and a tame cow, get one of those, I don't know, and going after her and punishing her for making me realize that it really was my fault. And during that time, my youngest son, who was about 15 at the time, I can still see it, we were in Clifton driving. We were by the Burger King. I think I had just gone and mailed Chris a gift card, or, we can outsmart them when we need to give them money, but we know we shouldn't give them cash if we send all the gift cards or wire money and this, No. He told me later, Mom, that never paid a bill. That never, didn't do, I lied to you about that. But anyway, we were driving back, and again, just the constant misery, and my stomach's so upset. And my son looked at me, and he said, and he whispered it, like as if he would whisper it, then maybe whoever's listening, God or whoever, wouldn't hear him say it. And he whispered to me, Mom, I think God forgot about us. In the same voice that you would say, oh, someone was supposed to pick me up, but I think they forgot. I mean, he seriously meant it. And in my head, to him, I was like, oh no, God's never forgotten us, blah, 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 just brushed him off, basically. But in my head, I said, yeah, he either doesn't exist or he hates us. And for someone whose only hope had been for so many years that God loved me, that was kind of one of the final straws as well. And I was one of the walking dead. And again, I wasn't putting things into my body that made me feel that way, but I felt that way. I dreaded every morning. I felt sick every day. I couldn't sleep at night. I would cry so hard at night that my son again would be coming into my room, putting his arms around me, crying, begging, pleading with me to quit crying because he was afraid I was going to die. I didn't even see him because I was so focused on my obsession, and I was just as sick. And we had to get a mediator to get Chris out of the facility he was in, that was when he was being held hostage by the social worker. And my dad was fixing to sell every piece of land and house he had for us to find a place to put him. Again, we're still so sick, going to take all of his retirement money. We were going to put everything we could to save him. And the social worker tricked my parents into taking him. And I kept trying to tell them, this is not a good thing. They have no idea what they're getting into. This is back in Clifton, where he grew up, where all these friends are. And of course, they're just like, we'll do whatever it takes. And they just took him right into their hearts and their home. And I have to say, I'm so grateful for my parents that they have always loved my kids, no matter what they were going through. And so he came home, saw my dad and I, and he kept saying, I think I need to go to AA meetings. So my dad and I found every AA meeting, within a 50-mile radius. My dad would take him to meetings during the day, and or to the other appointments that he had, and I would go at night. And I went with him one night. It was a Wednesday night to this little meeting in Meridian, Texas, very small. They're in Bosque County, and you had to walk up these stairs that were like this narrow and this steep, and the building kind of shook every time you took a step. And then the floor was squishy, and the couches and the chairs had like stains that I was thinking, I don't know what this is, and now I know it's probably coffee, but it was just like the rug stank, and there's these people, and they're just smiling in there, and I'm thinking, y'all have not come very far. And when we first got in there, they thought that Chris and I were a couple, which at the time maybe kind of look at it like, what? But now I kind of get that. And we sat in that room, and I can't even, all I heard was one thing. And when they were reading the promises, I heard that they could lose that fear of people and economic insecurity. And I thought, oh, if God will do that for them, maybe he'll do it a little bit for me. And that was the first hope I'd had in I don't know how many years, that maybe my life was not over, that I could actually live again. Because Chris, because of the medications he was on, was like a zombie. It still wasn't my son. Still not my son. And I kept going back to that little meeting. Bless their hearts. They adopted me. They called me their little, and it was an open AA meeting, but they called me their little Al-Nonic. And like I was some kind of like a little, mascot or something. But anyway, that night, though, as Chris and I were leaving, the leader of the group, who's now a really good friend, he put his arm around me, and he just hugged me, and he said, Tammy, my wife and I met in these rooms 15 years ago. You just keep coming back. You just might meet somebody. And I thought, there is no way, I don't even talk this way, I can't even tell you what was in my head. There is no way in heck that I will ever get mixed up with the likes of y'all. Ever. Never. Ever. 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 I was offended that he would even say that. I remember looking and thinking, why would anybody want that? But I kept going to that little meeting because it was close by, and I didn't have the gas money to drive all the way back into Waco at the time to go to the Al-Anon meeting I knew of. And they kept letting me, and they were so sweet, and they kept loving me. And even when Chris was gone, because he was in the process of relapsing, I was basically going by myself. These two guys showed up, and they were from the Whitney group. And I didn't even know there was a group in Whitney. And they kept kind of looking at me, and they introduced who I was. And then one of the guys came up and said, hey, there is an Al-Anon group in Whitney. And my wife goes, and I think you might like it better than this, because they're looking like, you've been coming all this time. And so I went to that group. Thank you, God. And they actually had an AA and Al-Anon meeting at the same time, so I got to, Chris, when he was with me, would go to that side of the old Dairy Queen or whatever it was, turned into a meeting house, and I went to my side. And I realized that the way I had done Al-Anon before, that I probably wasn't going to get away with it again, which I didn't get away with at that time because it didn't keep me sane. And so I knew I had to get a sponsor. And again, it was one of those things, I have to get a sponsor. It's not God gently lead me by your spirit to get a sponsor. It was like, looking for my sponsor. And there was a lady there that I loved what she said, and she even lived close to where I lived. But my first thought was she wouldn't want to be my sponsor. I'm not worthy. Why would she want to sponsor me? She's the coolest lady in here. Why would she want to sponsor me? And so it took me weeks to get up the nerve to ask her to be my sponsor. And you know what she'd been praying? That I would ask her to be my sponsor. It amazes me how this program works. And one of the first things, though, that she made me do, she made me start praying for that woman in San Antonio, that social worker. I wasn't too sure about her after that. But, that's what started chipping away at that lack of faith and that wall that I had built up. Because I obeyed her. Every time I thought about her, I had to pray for her. A good thing. I couldn't pray something like, please let her die. I had to pray positive things. Let her get her punishment. And you know what? That started changing me. And there came a point, if she walked into the door right now, which I would pray that she was, because she really was probably a sick person in her thinking. But I would go over and I would hug her and tearfully thank her that she was part of my story, because that's kind of what started breaking that down. And we started working on the steps, and I said, I know the first three steps. I'm there. I've been in church all my life, whatever. She's like, no, you don't know the first three steps. I said, yes, I do. And I rattled them off to her. You don't have she made me start. I cannot tell you how long we stayed on the first three steps. And I was getting kind of frustrated because I couldn't wait to get to that fourth step because I had a lot of things to list. I knew I had faults in my character, and I couldn't wait to get to it and make that big, long list. And she made me go over those first three steps over and over. And I remember one morning getting up, and it was cold outside, and I was laying there in bed, and I was like, she keeps wanting me to do a gratitude list. Does she not realize I have really nothing to be grateful for? I'm a single parent. I've got this kid that I'm not sure what's going to happen to him, and that, I had so many good things too, but I didn't see it. So I thought, fine, I'll make a gratitude list. And my attitude was horrible. I'm just going to tell you, it was horrible, but God used it. I put my feet in, and I thought, what do I be grateful for? I have nothing. I put my feet on the floor, and I had carpet. And very sarcastically in my head, I said, well, God, thank you. I've got carpet on my floor so my feet aren't cold. So I'm going to cry. Not to cry. And then I remembered the students that I taught. Some of them didn't even have running water or electricity. And they were cold that morning. It was like a dam broke. And I saw all the beautiful things. My other two kids, my parents, my job that I had working with kids that I loved, my friendships that stayed with me through all of that. And I couldn't quit making a gratitude list that day. There was hundreds of things that I had to be grateful for. It was like I had opened my eyes for the first time in years. So that was a huge dam. And by the time we got to the fourth step, all the things that I thought were my strengths, my perfectionism, my people-pleasing, my overachieving, those were my character defects. I had to completely rethink how I was and who I was. But what a wonderful thing. And then when I got to go to amends, my first amends I had to make was to myself. I had been so uncaring of that little girl that was so afraid and felt so unloved. I had done nothing to love her or care for her. But I want to tell you very quickly, as in my amends, I was 49 years old. And 41 years earlier, I had had a foster sister for 1 year that I had been very jealous of. She had to sleep with me, and because of her abuse that had happened to her. And of course, I was 9, she was 8. I didn't understand. She had issues that I had to deal with, like at night, or she had a lot of fears, and she bonded more with my brother instead of me, and I was afraid I was losing my brother, and I was really mean to her. And she was one of the first ones that came to my mind, and I was like, God, she left us after 1 year. That's been over 40 years ago. I have no idea I couldn't even remember for sure what her last name was or anything. And within 1 or 2 months of that, she found me on Facebook, and I got to make amends to her. And guess what? She has sobriety in AA. And she forgave me for this. In fact, she doesn't even remember. She remembers that my family for that 1 year was the only family that ever loved her. And I got the privilege of being a witness for her wedding this last October. God works in miraculous ways. So miraculous. I have to give you one more story real quickly. My time will be over. About the sense of humor that God has, and when they give you a smart aleck sponsor like I have. No. I, over the Meridian group, had some kind of little Christmas thing in November. I don't know. It wasn't a Christmas thing, but it was called Ebenezer Scrooge. And it was a meal and a speaker. And my sponsor and her husband were going and asked if I would meet them there. And I had something going. I said, well, I'm going to skip the meal, but I'll be there for the speaker. And, of course, by the time came, I wish I hadn't gone. But I did. And I went in, sat down, and she's sitting there all... I had supper with some really nice guys. And I'm like, that's good. Again, I've been single for 9 years. And it was not... It didn't bother me that I was lonely. I knew I was lonely, but I didn't care. I didn't need that kind of trouble. And and she said, oh, but one of them is a cowboy. And I said, I don't do cowboys. I don't want to hear another word about it. Okay. It's the intermission, I guess, for the speaker. She looked at me and she said, go get me some tea at the tea table. And I said, you have tea. I know, but I want to know. I said, but you've got a whole glass. Go get me tea and be nice. And I was like, okay. She doesn't remember saying it. She did. She said it like that. And so I was like, okay. I'm thinking, I don't know what's going on here. So I walk up there, and sure enough, there's this guy that may or may not be a cowboy. He had a hat on and all that. And I thought, and I looked at him, I thought, just smile and say hello. You can be nice. And I said hello, and we started talking. And we talked until they started speaking again, and we talked until they chased us out of the church. And I just couldn't believe it. And I couldn't believe how I was feeling, and I was mad at her because she put this trouble in my life. And I called her on the way home, and I was telling her about it. And I said, and Kathy, what was his name? And she laughed, because the most two toxic relationships I've ever had was a dating relationship in college with a guy named Mike, and that marriage to a guy named Mike. And she laughed, and she said, Mike. Because honestly, and he had a name tag, just like we all do today, just like that, Mike. Right? And I'm looking at him all this time, and I never saw the name tag, and I think that was a God thing, because God knows I would have run away. And we didn't exchange information, went back to a meeting, and there he was. Hadn't seen him before. 2 or 3 weeks later, and he gave me his card with his phone number on it. And for 2 months, I would take that card out of my purse, and I put it back in my purse. I actually threw it away twice in the trash can, and went back and got it out of the trash can and got it. And finally, I had the courage to call him, and we went out on our first date. And you notice the stories about me now. When I finally found myself, and this is one thing that my sponsor told me, your greatest hope of helping your son and your other children is getting well. And I believe that. I believe that with all my heart. Anyway, so we went out, and we're driving down the road, and I have permission to share this. And he said, there's something I've got to tell you before we take this any further. I'm like, what? He says, well, I've spent some time for DUIs. And I've spent some time what? And he told me. And we both joke when we drive by that place now, because I was looking for the door handle. I was actually seriously calculating, are we going slow enough that if I jump, it will be okay? Because that's how afraid of that I was. And but we ended up having a nice time. I called my sponsor the next morning and said, you're not going to believe this, though. She said, what? I said, he's been in prison. Prison? Yes. What for? Did he hurt somebody? No. Did he attack somebody? No. Did he kill somebody? No. And I knew where this was going. Did he rob someone? No. What did he do? Said he got arrested for drunken driving. Oh, an alcoholic got caught. Yeah, driving a car. Yeah. That's what she said. That's what she always said. Anyway, I'm running out of time. We've been together ever since, and we've been married nearly 4.5 years ago. Bless his heart, he's an alcoholic, he's a cowboy, and his name is Mike. But he has 3 strikes against him, but it has been such a joy. But when we got, my sponsor tells me I have a high horse, and that high horse's name is Trigger, and I can get on that high horse and come across the street and tell you how to do your business real fast when I get on him. And as we were leaving for our honeymoon, actually she called me, we were talking all the way down there. You know how these relationships are. And she said, leave Trigger at home. And I said, okay, I won't. I wouldn't want to bring Trigger on my honeymoon anyway. No, I wouldn't be on a high horse. And we get down to our cabin called the Happy Trails. And there is a picture of Trigger and Dale Evans and Roy Rogers on every wall of the house. And I just think that God has such an amazing sense of humor. But as my time closes, let me read something that means a lot to me. I used to struggle. I got muddy. I got dirty. It was ugly. It was dark. But this is from Our One Day at a Time by Ralph Waldo Emerson. There is a guidance for each of us, and by lowly listening, we shall hear the right word. Certainly there is a right for you that needs no choice on your part. Place yourself in the middle of the stream of power and wisdom which flows into your life. Then without effort, you are impelled to truth and to perfect contentment. You see how Chris is doing. You see how my life is going. I have to tell you, my other two kids are doing great. College degrees, well, they've got good jobs. They love me. They've accepted my amends. They love Chris. And I feel so blessed. Thank you again.